really a big thank you to Pew for putting this together. It's a great opportunity on the 2-year anniversary to talk about one of my favorite topics, DACA. So I'm going to talk, as most of you know, the program was announced a little bit more than 2 years ago in June of 2012 and was implemented 2 months later. And the program identified a group who were considered very low priority for removal from this country, those who had come to the United States as children and were educated in U.S. schools. And I'll talk a bit about what we know so far about DACA applications, with special attention to metropolitan level data and some preliminary findings from the Brookings DACA project. So in this project, we're particularly interested in metropolitan level questions around DACA. In particular, the behavior of the potentially eligible population, the role of nonprofits and others in recruiting and assisting potential applicants, and the administrative response by USCIS. After all, the 2 months between the announcement of the program and the beginning of the application process was a very short period of time for all of those actors to gear up. There was no federal funding allocated for the services of community-based organizations, legal service providers, and others that make up the infrastructure that serves immigrants. We know that both the underlying composition of the eligible population and the organizations and agencies that assist them vary by place. So we're interested in learning about experiences across localities in the United States in order to understand the variation in success in the DACA program. So we had originally designed the study to inform a potential broad legalization program. Those were more hopeful times. But what we're learning from this study and others currently underway should be helpful as the Obama administration considers an expansion of the DACA program. So the Brookings DACA study has a quantitative component where we're analyzing data on DACA applicants, and we're also conducting interviews with nonprofit advocacy groups, legal service providers, Dreamer activists, and municipal leaders in key metropolitan areas around the country. So who are the DACA population? We can break this big group out into several subcategories of potential participants. The DACA ready are those who are immediately eligible. They fit the age and arrival criteria and are either currently enrolled in school or have graduated from a U.S. high school. This group has the easiest time accounting for their presence in the United States. They tend to be younger and have an easier trail to document. There's also a sizable group that will age into eligibility. They arrived prior to 2007, but were not yet 15 at the start of the program. And it's estimated by the Migration Policy Institute that nearly 500,000 young people could potentially age into eligibility in the near future, provided they stay in school. In many places across the country, there's considerable support for the program within schools and organizations that promote the program and assist applicants. A third group who otherwise meet the program requirements must enroll in school or earn a high school diploma or equivalent in order to become eligible. They are estimated to be more than 400,000, and this group is the hardest to reach and the hardest to convince that DACA is for them. They tend to be older and isolated from support organizations. They would have to enroll in an educational program like the GED to become eligible. And through our work in the field, we've learned that each of these groups requires different methods of outreach and different methods of assistance. We've also heard from service providers that there is a fourth, much smaller group of DACA eligible. These are typically youth being screened by legal service providers who are found to be eligible for other legal statuses, most commonly U visas for victims of certain crimes, and special immigrant juvenile status, which helps foreign children in the United States who've been abused, abandoned, or neglected. So it's a real quick run through the numbers before Adam gets the hook. And I'll just start here with the total program applications by quarter. Applications came in very large numbers in the early part of the program. More than 250,000 people applied in the first 3 months. The number of applications remained high during the first several quarters and has since dropped. USCIS has adjudicated most of the applications, and using their quarterly data, it appears as though 88% have been approved, 3% denied, and the remainder is still pending. Deferred action is only granted for 2 years, and so those that applied early and had their applications accepted early on must now reapply for another 2-year grant. Applications have come in from more than 200 countries, and at least 25 countries have over 1,000 applications. 77% of all applications, and nearly 500,000, have come from Mexican youth. 3 Central American countries have the next largest numbers of applicants, El Salvador with 4%, and Guatemala and Honduras each with 2.5%. The next largest number of applicants is from South Korea, about 7,500 or 1% of the total. Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and the Philippines round out the top 10, and you can see more countries, the other 15 countries, and the share by region of the world. This map shows the number of applications by state, reflects the patterns of the growth of the unauthorized population on the map that Michelle showed earlier. There's no surprise that California and Texas have the largest number of applicants, followed by Illinois, New York, and Florida. These are the states with the greatest number of unauthorized residents. Many of the newer destination states, those with the greatest change in the unauthorized population, such as Nevada and Arizona in the west, Georgia and North Carolina in the southeast, have had relatively large numbers of applications. Fortunately, for the purposes of our project, where we're really interested in what happens at the local level, USCIS recently released data on DACA applicants in 75 metropolitan areas. These 75 metro areas account for 82% of all requests nationwide from the start of the program through September of 2013. Most metros on this list have between 1 and 9,000 applications, but 11 are home to more than 11,000 DACA requesters. Los Angeles has the largest number of applications or applicants, approximately 78,000 or 13% of all applications across the country. DACA requesters in the New York metropolitan area submitted 44,000 applications, and the rest of the metros shown here in orange all had between 12 and 31,000 applicants. Together, these 10 metropolitan areas make up half of all applications nationwide. So the approvals are another thing that we're interested in, how they vary by place. Where are approvals the highest and the lowest? Here in blue, you can see the metros with the highest approval rates, as all of them are well above the U.S. metro average of 89%. Chicago and Riverside, California, are metros with large numbers of applications and have some of the highest approval rates, 93% each. Overall, California fares well with 7 smaller metros with a high approval rate, as do some smaller DACA metros in the west, such as Albuquerque, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City. In terms of those with lower than average approval rates, some metropolitan areas stand out, in particular New York and Houston, due to the large number of applications, but they're lower than average approval rates. And while the number of applications is not large in Miami and Boston, they are notable as well-established immigrant gateways with lower numbers and lower approval rates. Elsewhere, lower than average approvals appear in many of the newest destinations, such as Las Vegas and Reno, Nashville, Charlotte, Indianapolis, and several metros in Florida. So what accounts for these differences across metropolitan areas? Lots of things. That's what we're doing out there, trying to figure things out. We don't have enough information from these particular data to know among those applicants that have not been approved how many applications have been denied and how many are still pending, but we can assume differences in application levels and approval rates reflect the size and characteristics of the underlying undocumented population, including birthplace, age structure, educational enrollment, and attainment. No doubt the infrastructure in place to assist immigrants, considering DACA matters as well, and well-informed, well-intentioned service providers may be the most effective in helping the DACA eligible through the process. So what are we finding out in the field? We've been to 6 metropolitan areas so far. They're listed here: Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, Phoenix, New York, and San Francisco. And we have talked to and interviewed scores of legal service providers, nonprofit and community-based organizations, municipal officials, as I mentioned before, various advocacy groups. From these interactions, we're hearing about what's happening on the front lines, how service providers view the program as it has unfolded, and how they've approached outreach and methods of assisting the DACA population. Because each metro has its own immigrant composition, its own constellation of organizations that provide services, and its own state and municipal policies that support or drive away immigrants, each has its own story. It's pretty clear that the first wave of applicants well, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the timing of applications and adjudications vary across places. And the first wave of applicants and the earliest ones had a large share of those we consider DACA ready. Younger people, teens in particular, had connections to schools, which really helped demonstrate continuous presence in the U.S. Older applicants had more time in the U.S. to prove. The farther you are from school, the more likely you are to have to use other types of evidence, including things like library cards, PayPal histories, mobile phone contracts, bank statements, enrollment in post-high school courses. There's a range of things that people have used. Many of these things are not typical for young people who are undocumented in this country. So finding that evidence and documenting their time in the U.S. gets much harder as the farther away from arrival that you get. But we can see in our data that younger applicants are processed faster and approved more readily, and older applicants applied later and have larger numbers of pending applications. These findings have implications for renewals as they're tied to the date the case was adjudicated, not the date of application, but also for thinking through what an extension of DACA would look like for adults who would have to document their presence in the United States. There are a lot of factors that come into play in making DACA a successful program in individual places. Sorry about that slide being blank for a while. And here we know that the history of immigration matters. Well-established immigrant gateways have better systems of support in place. But we were surprised by what we've found so far. We thought that places with shorter histories and perhaps not as well-developed infrastructure might have a harder time with outreach and assistance, but this isn't necessarily the case. And we have to go to a few more places that are newer destinations to explore that further. Another factor that varies by place is the composition of the population. In particular, country of birth seems to matter when it comes to application and approval rates. Mexican applicants drive the numbers, but they're younger and have higher rates of approval than the average. And some of the differences across places, but not always, has to do with more diverse populations who tend to be older, and that may have something to do with lower application rates and lower approval rates in places like Boston and Miami. And other issues that can induce people to apply include state and local policies, particularly around driver's licenses and in-state tuition. So, and finally, I just want to say something about barriers to applying for DACA. Another part of our inquiry is around why people are not applying, what's holding them back. And we've identified a number of barriers. Some people don't have the kind of documentation that they need, and others are hard-pressed to come up with the fee, $465, the application fee necessary to apply. Other potential applicants fear that they're taking a huge risk and that they will put themselves or their family in jeopardy. And there are others, particularly from Asian countries, who feel like they may bring shame on their families. This is a group that is not typically used to talking about or being viewed or viewing themselves as being in the country in an undocumented status, and that really is quite different from those from Latin American countries, particularly Mexico and Central America, where it's very common. Other people have been holding out for a clearer pathway to legal status. They're waiting for a legalization program. And another group are hampered by their own perceptions of themselves and how they fit into the program. And so there are people that would otherwise fit the eligibility criteria, but they don't see themselves in the program. And in particular, this relates to what I was just talking about with certain Asian groups, and it extends beyond that. Non-Latinos often are not perceiving this program as one for them, and the non-college bound also, because this program was originally tied up with the DREAM Act and the push for something that would help people who were going to college in this country but who are undocumented. So if there is further executive action for a broader group of immigrants, the federal government, state and municipal governments, and the host of non-governmental organizations on the ground will have to act very quickly to organize, educate, and assist, but at least they'll have the experience of DACA to draw on. Thank you.